Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much for your welcome. And I'd first like to start by thanking the Jimmy Reid Foundation for this invitation. It is a source of pride to join the previous speakers and also to speak at a foundation dedicated to a hero of mine. I also would like to thank the construction company outside working on George Square for removing Arthur Balfour's statue. When I thought of Jimmy Reid on the day I gave my rectoral speech, I thought also of Arthur Balfour, and I thought how unpleasant it must be that a working class boy from Glasgow and then a Palestinian refugee would come and take your job in an institution that you had built through the exploitation and the colonial plunder of others. I'd also like to thank Jimmy Reid. After coming out of Gaza, I was privileged to meet Alex Salmond, who told me that when he was First Minister of Scotland, the 5 presidents, chancellors of the Scottish universities had written to him asking for a change in the law that allowed rectors to be elected in Scotland, and that he had gone and spoke to Jimmy. And Jimmy was adamant that this is a democratic right by which students in Scotland were unique globally in being able to choose their rector. So today I would like to try, as we are approaching the 3rd year of the genocide, to understand what we've learned from this genocide. The formative components of settler colonialism and the way colonialism is a formative part in the development of European political identity. As the princelates of Spain were unified, Europe began its colonial endeavor, and with it, its genocidal turn. And so European political identity is structurally attached to settler colonialism, and with it, its genocidal instinct. And we saw over the last 2 years that despite the advancements in artificial intelligence with Lavender, the AI software that allowed Israelis to pick out their victims in Gaza, or another program called Where is Daddy that allowed them to choose 1,600 health workers for assassination, or access to Microsoft's AI. Despite the 2,000-pound laser-guided bombs, despite the electronic surveillance planes that the RAF flies over Gaza to provide real-life intelligence for the Israeli army, colonialism remains a very primitive enterprise that is essentially rooted in violence. And it's composed of genocidal erasure. An erasure is not just the taking of lives. It is the taking of lives and the denial of the existence and the humanity of the victims. It is the removal of their history, of their present, and to ensure that their future does not come along. But we also discovered that genocidal denial is a critical component of the genocidal project. Ghosting the victims, censoring those witnesses of the genocide, or pressuring them into censoring themselves is a critical component of this genocide and other genocides. And that the genocide, still, despite all of this technology, needed its primitive components. Geographic clearance that was started in Scotland at the embryonic phase of English colonialism. The use of famine, tested in Ireland with great success, and then West Bengal. The fostering of public health conditions that generate epidemics, that multiply the lives taken through a genocidal project. And racism, that racializing hierarchy that places the victims of genocide at a much lower rung in order to justify their killing and to render them ungrievable, to render their children ungrievable. One of the harshest and most difficult things for us living in the United Kingdom to accept is that had Israel killed 20,000 kittens, the liberal outrage from Blue Peter to the FA would have been deafening. But at the very beginning of the genocide, the Israeli head of the army dog-whistled racism by calling Palestinians human animals and triggered the racializing of Palestinians. And so in order for you to speak about the suffering of the Palestinians, there was a gate that you had to go into, and that gate was for you to accept that the lives of a handful of Israeli hostages were more important than the lives of millions of Palestinians. And so at each interview in the media, that gateway, that gatekeeper, whether it's the BBC or CNN or Sky, would insist that you accepted where the rungs occupied by the Israelis were and where the rungs occupied by the Palestinians were, in order for you to voice your victimhood. And another part of this genocide is what we had termed in the past scorched earth policy. But we had seen scorched earth policy in the 40s, 50s, and 60s as involving the burning, the destruction of great parts of the countryside. But what we have witnessed now in the 21st century, where the majority of the inhabitants of the global south live in urban areas, in refugee camps, in slums, that scorched earth means the destruction of water and sewage treatment plants. Scorched earth means the dismantlement of the health system, the killing of its professionals. These are the components of scorched earth in a world where the majority of the inhabitants live in urban dwellings. And in the last couple of days, we were given the last component of genocide, also primitive. Trump's plan for Gaza is, if you take out the Palestinians and you replace them with Native Americans, is the plan for a Native American reservation with its own casinos and with its own hotels to generate an income for a population deemed so low on the racializing rung that their needs are purely biological. They need to be fed, they need to be watered, and they need somewhere to sleep. And now, in addition to that, we see the return of Viscount Blair, showing